Hello, everyone. Welcome to join us on the first session in the afternoon. This session will discuss about the topic of food waste versus packaging waste. This panel will be moderated by Alan. Alan actually gave us a great presentation earlier today. Please do watch it if you didn't have time to make it this morning. Alan is the Sustainability Director of APAC region from Third Air. So I will let Alan to make the introduction to you for the rest of the team. Session is yours, Alan. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. And thanks to all the team at Sustainability and Packaging Asia 2020 for bringing us together on this very important topic, food waste versus packaging waste. I'm joined today by an expert panel, a fantastic panel of experts with an amazing depth of knowledge and experience in this exciting and very relevant right now topic. Both food waste and packaging waste are visible challenges and in the public conscience. So this is a hot topic right now. Both have significant reduction targets by major companies and governments all around the world. But the path to solving these challenges is far from clear or consistent. So we're going to set the scene with some opening comments from each of the panelists and myself, and then dedicate the rest of the session to a question and answer led discussion, which I'm sure will be both thought-provoking and very interesting. To kick us off, I'm going to start with a brief look at a framework of factors influencing this often emotional space. Thanks, Nancy. So today's environmental challenges are really complex. And in this space of food packaging and food waste, that's absolutely true. With no simple solutions to waste challenges, no silver bullets looming on the horizon that are going to solve everything for us, how do we go about determining the right path forward? In the global landscape, there's really significant drivers for action and pressure for action in this space. And they split into two broad fields. The legal or regulatory drive, which is about government commitments or the pressure through legislation, taxes, extended producer responsibility type programs. And then the pressure for action from social sources, like the media, like consumers. So let's break that out into what types they are. Thanks, Nancy. The social pressures really split into two broad camps here. We have two big blocks of areas at play. One is pollution, ocean plastics, all of the attention that is being given to the rubbish, to the waste that's not making it to the right place and is leaking into the environment. And then at the same time, we also have climate change. So another broad drive for action. And climate change, a measure of climate change often talked about as global warming. Under climate change, we can break that out a little bit further by talking about how do we measure it? And perhaps one of the most well-known or talked about is carbon footprint. So underneath climate change, we have areas of drive around activity and things like efficiency and performance. So when we think about packaging or food, we're thinking about waste reduction, resource optimization, reducing the amount of resources consumed, and in performance, preventing food waste or damage prevention, optimizing transportation outcomes. Well, on the other side, thanks, Nancy, under pollution, we have circularity, the idea about choosing materials that are more circular, perhaps renewable resource content, recycled content, responsibly sourced materials, and areas like recovery, like recycling, composting, reuse programs, and reusable closed-loop materials. But it's not a simple world. There are trade-offs between these two types of outcomes. There's competition, and it is a balancing act for us to address. So now I'd like to hand over to the first of our panelists and introduce you to Edwin Say. Edwin leads Food Industry Asia's sustainability strategy and the efforts to support Food Industry Asia's mission as the voice of the food industry in Asia. Before joining FIA, Edwin was Executive Director of the Singapore Environment Council, where he promoted eco-labeling, recycling, and consumer awareness on environmental issues. Over to you, Edwin.
Thanks, Alan. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be on this very distinguished panel to really discuss two topics which very often seems to be dealt with very separately, but I think it's more closely linked than we think. And I'm happy to be joining this panel to try to make some sense about what needs to be done and what should be done. But give me 30 seconds to talk a little bit about Food Industry Asia, FIA. So we are a Singapore-based industry association, and we represent multinational food and beverage companies operating in Asia. And they range from your flavors and ingredients companies to the brand owners, as well as to all the major packaging companies like Silk Air. And our role really is to focus on policy and regulatory issues that impact the industry, covering sustainability, food safety, health and nutrition, and trade. So let me quickly move to my first slide. So this is a twin challenge for the food industry right now, tackling both food waste and loss, as well as packaging waste. But the industry, we are committed to approaching both issues head on. We are committed to helping to achieve the SDGs. Specifically relevant to this is SDG 12 on sustainable consumption and production. And on that score, we are focused globally on two big pushes. So the first one, there's a platform called Champion 12.3. So 2/3 of the world's 50 largest food companies by revenue are part of this platform, and we're all committed to half per capita global food waste at retail and consumer levels, as well as reducing food losses across the production chain. And of course, the second part on plastics and packaging is probably much more well known. We've all signed on to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's New Plastics Economy, global commitment to tackling plastics and packaging. Next slide, please. So I think a lot of us are quite familiar with these two parts. The one on the left talks really about food loss and waste. And generally it's been reported that on an annual basis, about 1.3 to 1.5 billion tons of edible food is wasted every year. Now, I'm not a mathematician and I don't plan to be one, but if you just average out, I don't know what an adult human consumes every year. But if you can imagine that the population of the largest country in the world, China, 1.4 billion, if we can channel that amount of food waste to feeding people, how much more will that impact the economy, society, as well as the environment, because you're reducing the use of land, natural resources, energy, as well as what goes into landfill, which itself causes a lot of environmental hazards. And then, of course, on the plastic side, it's quite well documented. Again, huge amounts of plastics is wasted every year. It's not recycled, ends up in the ocean, and a lot more money is spent trying to deal with it. And again, a lot of opportunities in there from a commercial, but also environmental and societal point of view that I think we really need to start taking stock of now, especially given the twin issues of COVID-19 and food security, but at the same time, the issues related to climate change and how much we need to do just to meet the Paris Accord targets, which we're lacking behind. So I'll be quite happy to hear the other panelists, and also the audience on this very exciting topic. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, Edwin. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to Mark Bartel. Mark is Special Advisor to the Fight Food Waste Cooperative Research Centre and Food Innovation Australia Limited. Mark has a long career in fighting food waste in many countries and helped establish world-leading voluntary agreements to reduce food waste all over the world, including the world-renowned UK Courtauld commitment. Welcome, Mark, and over to you.
Thank you, Alan. Now the next slide, please, Nancy. So I just wanted to kind of visualize some of what Edwin said there and just put this into context. So sometimes it's really hard to make an issue like global food waste tangible. So what I try and do is just kind of visualize it. So if global food waste was a country, what would it look like? Well, it turns out it would consume 32% of global food supplied by weight at a cost of around 1.8 trillion Australian dollars a year. We'll be consuming somewhere in the order of a quarter of all the fresh water used in agriculture, 23% of all the fertilizer used on Earth, and somewhere in the order of 1 in 4 of all food calories available on the planet. Now, I've got to just pause there because a recent study from the Netherlands suggests it could be even higher than that calorie count. That country would also be the 3rd largest carbon emitter after USA and China, and it will be generating around 8% of total global greenhouse gas emissions. To give that a number, that's about 4.4 gigatons of greenhouse gas emissions. And it'll be utilising a cropland area the size of China. So I'm sitting in Australia, and Australia's landmass is just 82% of China's landmass. So this is a lot of land and a lot of natural resources being used to grow food that is then not consumed and is ultimately wasted. This is a major global issue. Next slide, please, Nancy. So I just wanted to give a few examples by way of opening for our panel discussion on where I think some of the solutions might be in the interaction between packaging and food waste. So on the left-hand side of the slide there, you'll see one of the more traditional packaging formats for a joint of beef. And then underneath it, you'll see a complete format change to a vacuum sealed pack. So there's a bit of a win-win here, really, because what we see in this change is 69% less plastic packaging being used, but 4 days more shelf life. So that is a pretty impressive kind of thing to do. And actually, as Alan would probably tell you, if you then modified the atmosphere within that pack, you could get around 13 to 14 days more shelf life for that joint of beef. And this is a very high value food product. So there's something there which then is about rethinking the format. Then there's something about how do we address the issue of on-pack communication around food waste? How do we provide those visual cues to consumers? And this is just one of my favorite examples. So we know that bakery as a category is a very high wastage product category. And we also know that very often households don't actually get to use the whole of the loaf before it starts to be past its best. So here you're just seeing an example which actually provides that visual cue, which kind of chunks the loaf visually and heroes that final quarter as the bit to store in the freezer. This approach also then normalizes a new household behavior and implies that freezing bed is both a normal storage option and a natural or desired behavior. So this is just a great way, just one of many examples of how to use on-pack communication to reduce food waste in the home. And then, of course, there's packaging technology. And one of the things we often hear in tackling food waste is the confusion that consumers have around expiry dates, like use by and best before. But that confusion is often compounded when you're looking at things like open life. So you might have a pack that actually has more than one portion in it and therefore should be used over time. And people tend to forget when did they open that pack and when would it be safe to consume it by. So this sort of technology, a kind of time and temperature indicator on the lid of this pasta sauce, really kind of helps to remove that situation and provides, again, a visual cue to consumers. And then when we're talking about produce and packaged produce in particular, there are a whole load of technologies out there that allow us to manage ethylene levels and therefore ripening times and the ability to extend product shelf life. And then finally, just in the films area, this is just a really simple thing that has been introduced by Woolworths in Australia, but a number of other retailers around the world have done it. So they've just used a dark backed polymer to remove the ability for light to get into that pack of potatoes And that therefore reduces the chance of rooting and greening and mold, and therefore extending shelf life. And there, of course, are other sort of very innovative films like gas permeable films that help to control the gases in a pack and extend shelf life. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I just think that space around consumer education and engagement is just so interesting and so critical, and there's so much opportunity there. Our next panelist is Tim Grant. So welcome, Tim. Tim is a specialist in life cycle assessment, LCAs, with over 20 years of experience in developing and applying LCA thinking with a wide range of companies and organizations. He is the owner and product development manager for PK, a streamlined life cycle assessment tool. Thanks for joining us, Tim. Over to you.
Thanks, Alan. I just want to present a little thought experiment that was inspired by a project I did a while back on broccoli transport, where we could sacrifice maybe 20% of the broccoli, but actually reduce polystyrene usage because we could use recycled reusable crate systems. And it really comes to the heart of this idea of how much food waste is an appropriate amount of food waste to reduce packaging, or how much packaging is an appropriate amount of packaging to save food. And so to maybe look at these two, at the potential for these two to become circular and how they look when you recycle them. Nancy, if I could just go to the first slide. This is a map of the food waste hotspots from a recent project we did in Victoria. And what I want to draw your attention to is the sort of second line there, the 19, 169, 65, 241, and then 1,479. That's the climate hotspots for a group of, main group of Victorian food waste items. And these are actually in kilotons per year. And so it shows that the impact of making the food that we waste is really, really high. As Marcus has pointed to, it adds up almost to a country worldwide. And so, okay, that's not great. The impact of throwing it away into landfill is 87. If you could press the next slide, Nancy, just one click. Yep, you can see that the disposal impacts of the food are about 6% on top of the impact of making waste, getting rid of waste. If we would implement our best available waste recovery technology, so not a reuse, but a waste recovery, something like anaerobic digestion. If we go to the next slide, Nancy. We could get back about 14% of the embodied carbon emissions from that food could be recovered using anaerobic digestion through to biogas and the construction of energy. So this is using greenhouse gases as a proxy for impact. So and that's if all of the food was recovered at 100% and sent into an anaerobic digester. So what can we actually recover from food at the end of life if we choose to waste it at a given rate? So what I would do then is like, how do we compare that to what if we waste some packaging materials? And maybe not waste them, maybe we put them through a life cycle that has some form of linearity, or maybe has to go around a loop. So you would say that food has gone around a loop, it's 100% circular, but we still only recover 14% in that circular. So we go to the next slide, Nancy. For individual packaging materials, HDPE, PET, aluminium, steel, glass, the recycle rate, the benefits you get for going around a loop, i.e. you make something, you use it to deliver a purpose, and then you recover it, sits around about 50% for a lot of our heavier packaging materials. And what I haven't got on there and would be nice to have would be the impacts of recovery of plastic films, which at the moment are probably pretty low. Maybe they're sitting something like, if they're going back into a mixed plastic stream, might be something like the 14% or down as low as that. You can see, so whether it's energy or climate, you can get roughly 15% back of climate. For corrugated board, because the impact of virgin board actually has a lot of bioenergy in it, the recovery rate, energy performance there is not quite as high as the other materials. So what does this tell us? If we just go to the next slide, please, Nancy. This tells us that the packaging material normally has less impact and less mass than if we consider that the packaging materials are normally less mass than the product, so the product has, the food inside will be heavier and will generally have a higher impact. And down the bottom there, you can see the ratio of greenhouse gas impact of common food materials. It's a ratio of the product to the package. And so the cheese inside the pack is 45 times more climate intensive than the pack itself. That's 1.3 for beer, which you can barely see, 35 for dairy products, 7 for cosmetics. It can vary depending on what type of product you're looking at. So if the impacts of the product are a lot higher and the recovery potentials for our packaging materials at the moment, for many of them, there's a lot better options for recovering their value than there is for recovering the value of food if wasted. So I think out of this we can surmise that we can invest substantially in packaging, even if it has suboptimal end-of-life options, and the overall benefits for some indicators like climate change will be greater if we invest more heavily on packaging and less on allowing food to be wasted. And the final bit of this really is that this does, as you can see, it varies a lot by product type, and it also varies a lot by the type of material you're using. So that really suggests that these sorts of weighing up really need to be done on a case-by-case basis rather than just having a simple rule of thumb. That's my thought experiment. Thanks.
Fantastic, thanks, Tim. It's really interesting when we start digging into what the numbers actually mean in looking at this, interesting case of food versus packaging. So our next panelist is Associate Professor Carly Verghese. Carly is a Principal Research Fellow in the Industrial Design Program at RMIT University here in Melbourne. So Carly and I and other Melburnians all in lockdown right now in Australia. Carly's research involves working with industry and government on the role of packaging sustainability, food loss and food waste across broad supply chains. And this is just a major topic of work that Carly's involved in as it cuts towards trying to change or make a delivery against our government targets for reducing food waste here in Australia. Over to you, Carly.
Cool. Thank you very much, Alan. And hello, everyone. So Nancy, if we can move on to the next slide, please. I'd like to give you an update of an initiative that's happening here in Australia at the moment and how it's building resources in conjunction with, I guess, a range of different disciplines. So it's tackling food waste and packaging waste really requires that collaboration across disciplines, supply chains and sectors. Some of you may know, but the Fight Food Waste Cooperative Research Centre was established in July of 2018 and is a 10-year initiative in conjunction with industry, research and government tackling food waste. There's 3 research programs within the CRC. Reduce is the first one, which is obviously around reducing food waste across the supply chain. The second program looks at transforming of that unavoidable waste into innovative products. And then the third program is Engage, and the important role of engaging not only with industry, but also consumers to deliver behaviour change. As you can see on the slide, they're all the partners within the CRC, all working collaboratively on a whole range of different projects. So we've just kicked over our 2nd year of operation. If we just move on to the next slide, please, Nancy. Just want to give you an update of what has been happening in the Reduce program and around safe food packaging design, machinery, and also understanding consumers. As we know, there has been a lot of information and development that's happened over the years and from a global perspective. And what's happening here in Australia is we're really wanting to provide some real technical criteria, design notes, and training material to help you as packaging technologists, marketers, sustainable development managers, etc., across the different parts of the supply chain. So we've got a project around developing safe food packaging criteria and design notes being led by the Australian Institute of Packaging. And in the coming months, we'll be piloting that criteria out with interested parties. We've also got another project around packaging and processing technologies with the Australian Packaging and Processing Machinery Association to really understand what are those different innovations and machinery from a packaging and processing perspective, and how does that link in and support the supply chain. And then obviously the important role of understanding consumers and their perceptions of packaging. And there's a first report that's come out from the CRC looking at that particular issue. And so, yeah, so there's some real practical stuff that's happening in coordination with industry and government to really understand that whole balance around how do we protect and contain food with packaging to not waste food through the supply chain and also in the consumer settings as well. That's all I wanted to give as an update to begin with. Thank you.
Thanks, Carly. Really interesting. It's an incredible project and such a large one. Now, our final panelist is Dr. Han Zhang, who is the Sustainability Director for Dow Packaging and Specialty Plastics for Asia Pacific region. Han is responsible for driving Dow's 2025 sustainability goals and addressing critical business sustainability issues such as marine debris, recycling, and driving towards the circular economy. So over to you, Han. Be interested to hear your opening comments.
All right, thanks, Alan. Hello, everyone. Nancy, could you move to the next slide? Yeah, I just want to echo many of my fellow panelists' point that food waste is a very important environmental issue we need to address. Packaging, particularly plastic packaging, is an effective way to reduce food waste. However, plastic waste is another major challenge we are facing. How can we address them together? This is not only a question to society, but also to private companies like Dow. As one of the largest chemical company and also largest polyethylene producer, we focus on 3 sustainability priorities: climate protection, circular economy, and safer materials. These areas represent the real opportunities to make an important society and make an impact in society and grow value for our business and customers. We want to become completely carbon neutral by 2050 and also close the loop by enabling 100% of our products sold into packaging applications to be reusable or recyclable by 2035. How can we translate this overarching corporate targets into real implementation? How do they link to today's topic, which is reducing food waste and plastic waste? So Nancy, if you can move to the next slide. Let's see an example. Probably you heard many times that the plastic packaging can extend the shelf life, but have you actually seen the result? These two cucumbers, one with a very thin shrink sleeve and one without. After 3 days, the one without the packaging starts to turn bad. And after 15 days, you can see here, the one with plastic packaging stay fresh. You still can eat it. The other one even has mold on it. And no doubt, less than 1 gram of plastic saved in this cucumber. Nancy, if you move to the next slide. The question is, what happens after 15 days? Consumer eats the cucumber and then throw away the wrapper. 1 second ago, this plastic packaging was a food saving hero, but suddenly turned to the dark side and becomes waste. Can we change the fate of this plastic wrapper? Through innovation, collaboration, and investment, we start to see promising progress. This year, we successfully launched our first formulated post-consumer recycled resin in Asia. Working with our partners in China, post-consumer food packaging waste were collected. And using our technology, we are able to upgrade this waste into high-value application, such as a collation shrink film. And this PCR product is helping us make a circular reality without compromising the performance. And there are many challenges ahead of us to make this kind of a circular economy a new normal. And I look forward to the panel discussion today on how to make it happen. So back to you, Alan.
Wow, thank you. I like that, the dark side and the light side. Very interesting. Well, for the next section of the panel, we'd like to open up a discussion and just explore some of these concepts in a little bit more detail and give our panelists an opportunity to share some insights into some of the subjects that I think are burning questions in our minds. And I thought maybe to kick this off, I might just throw this at Edwin. You know, food waste and packaging waste are two of the food industry's biggest challenges. Yet much more has been said publicly and in the public conscience around packaging waste than food waste. And we see such differences in the total value of those. Why do you think that's the case? And what can and needs to be done to correct that imbalance?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. I think you brought a good point, and I think this was something that Mark alluded to when he was sharing, is that I guess when you talk about plastics and packaging, it's much more defined, and perhaps even there's not that many players involved, so it's easy for people to band together to make a move on solutions. And I feel that generally it's much more emotive, right? I mean, people react when they see rivers clog up with trash, or wildlife getting strangled with all sorts of plastics and packaging and all that. Whereas when you talk about food waste, which to my mind is probably much more urgent an issue to tackle, because it just has so much implications. I think people are still finding it difficult to put their hands on just which part or who to drive the issue. So I almost feel that for food loss and food waste, we need a Greta Thunberg to help drive the issue. But we also need something like an Ellen MacArthur Foundation that will band together all companies, governments, as well as like-minded stakeholders to look at the issue and to deal with it quite urgently before it becomes too late.
So thanks for those comments, and I think that kind of resonates with how I feel about it too, that we've got this sense of a need for balance in the discussion between the two because of the competing impacts. Anyone else on the panel want to throw a couple of words in on that question particularly? Okay.
So yeah, Alan, I'd agree with Edwin. Plastics had its kind of Blue Planet 2 Sky Ocean Rescue moment, and everyone stood up, and it really kind of, that media exposure on mass media really brought it home to us, and all of those emotive images we saw of trapped marine animals and things like that. We haven't really had that kind of deep mass media moment with food waste yet. We do have a number of organizations around the world that are starting to coalesce action around it. And so for me, if you like, the equivalent of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation for Food would be Champions 12.3, which is an international collaboration around delivering SDG target 12.3. But it's just not had that kind of presence yet. And it's really interesting. And I'm going to speculate here a little bit. Maybe it's because for so many people, throwing away food is still an unconscious behavior. It's such an ingrained behavior in us, we just don't think about it. And maybe one of the tricks we need to deploy, one of the levers we need to pull, is to make that unconscious behavior a more conscious behavior, and then see what happens.
Yeah, great comments. I think the intrinsic mental value of food waste may not be the same as it is with packaging waste. So if we're going to try and make meaningful steps towards reducing the amount of food waste that we have, I've got a question for Carly. Listening to you speak about the work that you're doing, what do you think are some of the key features of intuitive, safe packaging design that our audience could take away with them and that you would encourage them to think about when they consider designing packaging and packaging packaged products?
Yeah, no, sure, Alan. Actually, I want to start with, by working in the food and packaging sector, we have the opportunity, obviously, to make difference within our own work practice, but we're also consumers. And, you know, like some of us are at the moment, we are at home. And it's a great opportunity to go sift through your fridge, your pantry, your freezer, and start to look at the products that you bring home, and start to question the design of those. Are they working as they're intended to? And I think having that personal connection to then be able to take back into your workplace and have that colleagues and your supply chain partners, etc., is a real strength and opportunity that we all should be building upon. Some examples would be around, for instance, resealability. So if you've got a bag of shredded cheese that the consumer can open and then reseal to be able to continue and preserve that that cheese for future use, make sure that actually it does reseal and that the consumer can put it back in the fridge and it's not drying out. Things like that. Another one is around portion control. So, and I think that's where one of the great things about being part of the CRC is being able to make that connection into consumers as well, is around how are people actually using your product. And what is the serving size? So, for instance, and I guess we use classic example of ham, for instance, 250 grams of ham versus 100 grams or 50 grams and little portions of that. But be able to open it up and use a certain portion, and then have others that are already sealed, ready for another use. That would just be two examples that I think people could be optimizing.
Yes, really good insights. And I think when I think about the battle I've had to eliminate food waste from my household, that's certainly engendered some really interesting conversations and some unusual salad choices at the end of the week. The first of our questions that's come in from the audience is, how do you actually measure success or even collect data to measure against the targets set? I think, Tim, this might be something that you could help us reflect on a little bit, the data capture for the kinds of analysis that we need.
Yeah, I think it's a real challenge. We're actually involved in some work in that way at the moment, and it's very hard to work out what our current baseline, what the current levels of waste are of different commodities and foods. It's going to be even harder going forward to track how they're changing as we implement strategies and activities. So I think it's a challenge, but sometimes we can get lost to say, well, we can't really make any action until we've got a really strong baseline and we've got metrics set up to track progress. Well, yes and no. We can do a lot in a directional sense where we implement new technologies, new behaviours. We sort of know the direction that certain activities point us, and so we should go after them and go hard after those, while we collect and manage that background data. But what we don't want to do is sit around and say, well, once we've got the baseline sorted out and we know where everything is, then we'll implement some activities and policies. I think we're to do these things in parallel, but certainly we need much better at country level. We need much better reporting of waste flows, waste streams, particularly out of commercial and industrial operations, to be able to really track this. And the other thing is, we really need at that consumer level, really high quality waste management systems that also report. We have all the technology now to report data in almost real time of what's being collected week to week, and so we need to apply a bit of that tech that we apply to every other part of our life also to management of waste streams and waste data.
Yeah, I think that it's obvious these things have, both food waste and packaging waste have value. And I think that, we want to understand that value. And you mentioned technology at the same time. In watching your introductory remarks, I was pretty taken with some of the discussions around active and intelligent packaging, looking at saving the value of a food and some of this new innovative thinking. Seems to be an interest of yours, Mark, particularly. What do you think the role of active and intelligent packaging is today in the opportunity to reduce food waste?
Thanks, Alan. That's a great question. So there are so many different aspects to active and intelligent packaging. Whether you're talking about packaging diagnostics that help you understand when the seal on a pack has broken and the impact that might well have on the shelf life of that product, or the sort of things you would see with thermochromic ink technology and freshness indicators, which really give you a very strong visual cue around when food is becoming past its best and when you should use it in the home or in a restaurant. And then, of course, we have some technology that's been around for decades, like time and temperature monitoring. And certainly in Australia, where we see a very high proportion of food waste in the cold chain, being able to use those indicators to monitor waste and monitor temperature abuse and its impact on food waste throughout the value chain is a really important thing. Just to give an example of the scale of the challenge here, we have about 3 billion Australian dollars worth of produce waste in the Australian food chain. That is around 25% of total fruit and vegetable production in Australia. So those sorts of things are really, really important. And also, we need to think a bit about how some of the other packaging technology can help us as well. So there's a whole raft of both physical and digital technologies around track and trace for products. Track and trace can also be used to determine the mass balance of food waste in a supply chain, but I've yet to see that applied at scale. So I think there are lots and lots of things we can do with active and intelligent packaging. And at the moment, I think in the Southern Hemisphere, we're still playing catch up with what's going on in the Northern Hemisphere, and we need to do that.
$3 billion worth of fresh produce waste in Australia alone. And that's just one category. I probably should know the answer given the organisation I work for, but I would estimate that 3 billion exceeds the total value of all packaging sold in Australia. At a guess, it would be close to it if it isn't. So yeah, interesting way of thinking about it. Another question that's come in is that the reality is that most of the issue around waste treatment, even if the plastic is recyclable, it's not often recycled. What are we going to do to mitigate the end of life piece? In that, I think there's a really interesting question for the broader audience in this region, and maybe Edwin, you could talk to this a little bit. I think one of the big challenges we have is municipal waste systems and the varying levels of development of those throughout the Asia Pacific and Southeast Asia. I hope I'm not throwing you under the bus here. Could you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, that's perfect, because I think the two issues we are seeing, at least in this part of the world or just in Southeast Asia, is infrastructure as well as policy. Very often we jump ahead of ourselves. We look at innovation and we rush to do this and that, but we forget that policy is a very useful trigger to move things along. And I'll just give you an example of the use of recycled content in food grade packaging. There's a strong push towards that. I think a lot of companies are moving towards that. But you find that in many countries in this part of the world, there's no legislation that allows for it. So that's a blockage there. And then also in terms of even labeling and information for consumers, there's just so much going on a specific product labeling. You've got nutrition labeling, you've got producer information, you've got the recycling package stuff, and now there's all the other things about nutrition and all that. And I ask myself, I mean, I'm aware of these things because I guess I'm involved in the industry, but I can imagine if a normal consumer goes in, they're going to be overwhelmed with all the instructions and everything. But I think just back to that point, we really need to look at infrastructure because, again, it's sorely lacking. Just basic collection and then recycling is not there. And then you don't even have stuff like source segregation at household levels. So even if you collect all the recyclables, they're all not useful because they're all the quality is just not there, and it's not just reusable. So we really have to look at about infrastructure and policy to move this challenge ahead.
Thanks for that, Edward.
Alan, this is
Totally agree.
Can I add on to Edwin's point?
Please, Han, please.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think obviously many plastic packaging is used for food application, but then when you try to recycle them, you end up with the issue of food contact and other contamination issue. I think in order to address it, one way is improve recycling technology. You can clean the plastic much better in the future. Another way to solve this is to keep exploring new end-user application. We can use recycled plastic for many other applications. For example, like a road construction, use plastic waste to replace bitumen, which is a byproduct of oil refining. And also we can use waste plastic to make like a paper block or bricks. So as long as we can keep the molecule at the highest value as long as possible throughout the life cycle, then we consider it a part of a circular economy. And another option is feedstock recycling. So basically plastic is long chain polymer. And through the feedstock recycling, we can break down the long chain polymer to monomer or short chain polymer. And then we can regroup them through our cracker, which is our manufacturing plant. And then we don't need to worry about the food contact or other contamination issue. Basically, we can produce a virgin quality polymer, but actually the feedstock is from post-consumer recycled material. So there are many ways we can address the issue.
That's a great answer, and both Han and I work for large packaging and plastics manufacturing companies. So, you know, that largely tackles the comments I might have thrown at that as well. And in that I think that right now we're at a really interesting time of the accelerating installation of both collection infrastructure, sorting infrastructure, but also innovation in the recycling technology space to drive to circular outcomes for formerly difficult to recycle materials. And I think that we can make real strides here towards a circular economy. So with time in mind, I thought I might throw out the question that is the heart of this discussion. And that is, and I think we can all have a go at this one, can we reduce food waste and packaging waste at the same time? Perhaps we could start with you, Han, as a view on that, and then I'd be interested to go around the table and see if we do think these can be done at the same time.
Okay, sure. I'll keep my answer short so I can leave enough time to other panelists. Yes, absolutely yes, and we must make it happen. Food waste and packaging waste are the most important sustainability issue of our time. And for a long time, well, we know plastic is one of the best material to reduce food waste. But the one challenge we're facing is the recycling of plastic waste. Many of them, they're like a multi-layer laminates. But for a long time, it's a either or, that kind of a choice of to brand owner and also consumer. You can either have a recyclability or you have the performance. But now with a new technology, for example, the recycle-ready technology in development by Dow, we can give a consumer and a brand owner both. By using our resin, adhesives, and compatibilizer, our customer can produce a sustainable recyclable packaging that can be easily recycled through existing polyethylene film stream. And also without compromising the performance we need from a multi-material, multi-layer pouches or barrier film. So yes, definitely in the future, we can have both.
Great, thanks, Han. And I've gotten a bit excited, so we're running down time really quickly. We have a couple of minutes left. So quickly further around the table, and on my screen, Mark's next up.
Thanks, Alan. So yeah, absolutely yes. If the experience of running the Quartile commitment as a voluntary commitment since 2005 in the UK is anything to go by, and how it's going right now, then we can get to a point where, you know, in that voluntary commitment program, the per capita measure of food waste between 2007 and 2018 has gone down nearly 32%. And at the same time, we've saved many million tons of packaging waste from becoming waste. So there's the practical experience there. There's a lot of companies working in collaboration to do it. But that to me just sounds out that this is an incredibly possible thing to do.
Thanks, Mark. Carly?
I'll just say, if we value food and question when it does get wasted and understand the reasons why it's been wasted and make positive changes to reduce that, then yes, we can. And then couple that with the appropriate material selection for our packaging.
Brilliant. Brilliant answer. Tim, a final thought from you?
Yeah, I think while the two are in tension and will be in tension at certain times, we do both really hopelessly at the moment. So there is so much possibility to actually do better on both fronts, but recognise there will actually be times when we have to trade the two off.
And Edwin?
Yes, we definitely can do both, and we are. But like I mentioned earlier, I think we really have to kind of balance our focus on both, because they involve fairly huge investments. But I think definitely we're on track. We just need to spend a little bit more focus on food loss and food waste.
Look, and just for me to finally wrap up, thank you again very much to the panelists. Very interesting. I think we've all can see that there is a large problem, but huge opportunity. Thank you so much for joining us. Really interesting session. And thanks to the audience. Those are the questions that we didn't get to. I'm sure we'll trap those and attempt to give you answers, or an opportunity for the panelists to write a couple of notes back for. Thank you, audience. And thank you, Sustainability and Packaging Asia.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you all. See you in next session. Bye.